two very different and diverse parts of the world. So we'll come back to that when we start talking about what makes Sudan so unique. One of the things I always find fascinating about Sudan is how many different ethnic groups and how many different languages are spoken there. It's a country with 500 distinct ethnic groups and about 114 different languages. Now that doesn't mean that every day you're going to run across somebody speaking all 114 languages. Some of the languages that dominate are English and Arabic, but if you go all the way out to the rural areas, you will find people speaking their native languages, and those languages are all very unique, and they've spoken them for thousands and thousands of years. So very much like the diversity that exists in Montana, where you have at least 7 distinct Native American areas, reservations where people live and still preserve their language, their way of dress, their eating, their religious practices, their artistic expressions. Those distinct communities that you have in Montana that are so very important to indigenous people, they're also a very important concept in Sudan, where people strive to maintain their own dress, their language, their religion, their way of life. And so in that regard, diversity is something that Sudan has in common with Montana, and the importance of diverse people and respecting and valuing the different cultural practices that all these different people bring to the country. So that's a little bit of Sudan's ethnic and religious background. Let's talk a little bit about language for a minute. I said that there were 2 dominant languages, Arabic and English. And if you think back to the map, you'll understand why that would be. For many, many, many years, people from Egypt and from across the Red Sea visited the lands of Sudan. They traveled there, they traded, some of them stayed, they intermarried. And so Arabic became a very strong language in what's called Sudan today. And so in northern Sudan in particular, you will find that many, many, many people, actually most people, speak Arabic, some form of Arabic. But I also said that English is another dominant language. Well, where does the English come from? Well, the English comes from the fact that the British, during the early colonial period, the 1800s, started coming to Sudan in large numbers as well, to trade, to spread religion. And so English also became a very dominant language. So you will find that today, the two official languages, meaning the languages that are taught in schools and the languages that the government uses are English and Arabic. So it's what we call a bilingual country by choice, as well as all the other hundreds of languages I told you exist. The 2 dominant ones are Arabic and English. And that language practice still continues today. When students go to school, they may start out speaking Arabic, but at a certain point, they will be introduced to English as an official language. And so students in school in Sudan learn 2 languages from a very early age all the way up. Can you imagine if you had to learn Arabic at a very early age? That would be a bit challenging for me. I'm not a great language student, but students in Sudan and in most of Africa speak more than one language because these are what we call multilingual societies. I want to just turn very quickly to the question of religion, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So keep your ears open because I've got a couple of questions coming to you. I want to talk about religion because religion is a very important issue in shaping Sudan's history. Sudan has a dominant religion, and that religion is Islam. And again, if you think about the map and you think about people coming from Egypt and from the Middle East, where Islam is their dominant religion, those influences found their way into Sudan. So many people today practice Islam because of the long, long history of interaction with people from the Middle East and from the influence of Egypt. But there's also a large population of people in Sudan who are Christian. So where does the Christianity come from? Well, if you look at Ethiopia, just below the southern part of Ethiopia, of Sudan, many people in ancient Ethiopia practiced Christianity. As a matter of fact, Ethiopia is one of the earliest Christian countries in Africa. And so the influences from Ethiopia brought Christianity into Sudan. So today, Sudan has those two dominant religions, Islam and Christianity, as well as other religions that are practiced by the various different ethnic groups I talked about. So that's really important to know, because when you think about Sudan, you're now thinking about people who speak many languages, have many different ethnicities, have at least 2 official languages and 2 religions. So it's a really multicultural country. And we'll come back to what that really means in a little bit. But let me stop right there to see if I can get a little bit of conversation going with you guys. I can see Mrs. Oberweiss's class. To make sure you're listening, can I get a good wave from everybody? Give me a good wave. Okay, I know you can hear me. Okay, very good. All right, I can't see the other classes, but I know you're listening. So this class I'm going to throw out to Mrs. Oberweiss's class, because I know you're paying attention and I can see your faces. You look all excited. What do you think are the most important things that shape a country's history? Is it the geography, meaning where the country is located and who its neighbors are? Is it the landscape? What does the country look like? Does it have rivers? Does it have mountains? Is it language? Is it religion? Is it food? Is it music? What do you think are the most important things that shape a country's identity and its history? Anybody from Mrs. Oberweiss's class want to take that one? Yeah, I see some hands going up. Okay. Mrs. Oberweiser, can you help me with the questions, because I can't really see the faces so well.
There we go. I'm going to unmute and I'm going to ask Jody, you need to remove your hood in the building. And you
okay,
can,
Jody, how are you?
What's your thought?
Not bad. How are you?
This is JoJo.
Hi, JoJo.
And can you see? There we go.
Hi. I think the biggest part that shapes our country or like states is be like cultural and religion and languages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in Sudan's case, we're talking about a lot of different influences. Anybody else want to add to JoJo's answer?
I'm also wondering if what Boston thinks. I see Boston has some really good questions written down. So I know he's been thinking, but Tommy also has some input. What do you think, Tommy?
Okay, Tommy. Hi. You said food?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we haven't even talked about food yet, but food is really big. And from the little bit you know so far, what do you think might be some of the food influences? What was that? What was that?
Corn.
Absolutely. Well, you say you call it corn. Corn is a big influence, but they also produce a lot of wheat. The climate there is really conducive to wheat. So they produce wheat, which makes a special kind of bread. But yeah, corn is also found there. And because they're on the Red Sea, what does that tell you?
Okay. All right.
Countries that are located on large bodies of water, what does that tell you about the food?
That's in micro like rice or yeah.
Good answer.
They can go. They can also like fish.
Fish, absolutely. Fish is a big part of the diet, particularly for those communities that live along the Red Sea. I'm not going to say I've seen so much rice there, but in other parts of Africa where they are on the coast, rice is a big food source. Thanks very much. Great answer. Great answer. Anybody else want to give me one more answer before we get back to the history of Sudan? Save those questions because we're going to have time for questions. We're coming back to questions, not to worry. Okay, just save those questions. We'll get right back to them. Okay, well, I'll use this chance to get right back into the conversation then. So let's talk a little bit about the early history of Sudan before we talk about the modern history. So the early history of Sudan. One of the things about Sudan that I found fascinating, which I didn't know before I started traveling there, is that Sudan's history dates way back to the period of the pharaohs in Egypt and even before. And one of the things that you'll see if you go to Egypt, if you go to Sudan, are these pyramids. These pyramids are actually in Sudan, not in Egypt. And it tells you that there was a lot of influence between the people of Egypt and the people of Sudan, and that they brought their practices of burying the dead in the pyramids, and they brought their practice of religion from Egypt into Sudan. There are actually parts of Sudan that have more pyramids than in all of Egypt. That was really shocking to me. Now, I'll confess, I never got to visit the pyramids because they're far from the capital. And when I came, I only went to the capital. But if you ever get to Sudan, you got to go see these pyramids. They are unbelievable. Thanks for that picture, Ali. The other thing I want to tell you about the early history of Sudan is that Sudan was known by many different names. It wasn't always called Sudan. It used to be called by the Egyptians Nubia. If you ever read any old books about Sudan, or if you ever read any old books about Africa, you might come across the word Nubia. And Nubia was the old reference to the area of Sudan, and that's what the Egyptians called it. But the Greeks and the Romans also called it the land of Kush, K-U-S-H. So they had a different name for it. And there was yet another name for it. When the many Arab groups started coming over to Sudan, they called it Bilad as-Sudan. And what that means is the land of the blacks. And that's how Sudan was known throughout many, many, many centuries of its history. But of course, the people who lived there, like the people everywhere, they called themselves something different. They called themselves by the name that identified their particular ethnic group. So just know that Sudan wasn't always called Sudan, but that's the modern name we have for it from the Arabic translation of Bilad as-Sudan. So keep that in mind as you start thinking about countries and the country names and how they're known to outsiders. What we call a country from the outside may not be what the people on the inside know themselves as. So just think about that for a little bit. So now let's talk a little bit about modern Sudan. Modern Sudan is really, really a fascinating country because it has so many neighbors. Ali, could you give me the map again? While Ali's getting the map up, take a look at all of Sudan's neighbors. We have Egypt at the very top in the north, all the way down to Ethiopia in the south. But then above Ethiopia, you see a small country called Eritrea. That's another one of Sudan's neighbors. Let's go all the way around to the Red Sea. You see the Red Sea. And then across the Red Sea is Saudi Arabia. You go all the way around to Egypt. We've talked about Egypt. And then you look at Libya. And if you know anything about Libya, you know that Libya has vast, vast, vast deserts. So there's a lot of influence from the desert culture and desert people in Sudan. You go down below Libya and you see Chad. It's another country that has vast areas of desert. Then you come all the way down to Central African Republic, another one of Sudan's neighbors. Central African Republic is actually a lot more green. It's not as deserty, but it actually has some of the qualities of the desert, but not as much. It's a lot greener. And then you keep on going to the north and you see South Sudan. Let me stop for a minute and talk about South Sudan. South Sudan used to be a part of the Republic of Sudan. They used to be one country. But after many, many, many years of conflict between the people of South Sudan and in Sudan, they finally took a vote and the people of South Sudan voted to be a separate country in the year 2011. Why did they choose to be a separate country? Well, because the ethnic groups there had a very different culture from the people in the northern part of the country. They had a very different religion. Many of the people in South Sudan were Christian and did not want to practice Islam, which was being forced on them by the government in the north. And so the people of South Sudan decided they wanted to be their own country. And after many years of fighting, there was finally a vote. So South Sudan is now a separate country that has a close relationship to Sudan, but it is a unique country. Let's talk about something else that you can't see on the map so well, but I'm going to ask you to look closely. Do you see the sign that says the Nile River? Let's talk about that. Anybody who studies Africa has to know how important the Nile River is. Look how long it is. Ali has taken you through the Nile. The Nile River is flowing from Egypt down through Sudan. Part of it goes into Ethiopia, and part of it goes into South Sudan. So the Nile River really is the hugest, most fantastic river in Africa, and it crosses so many countries. In Sudan, the capital of Khartoum, can you put your cursor there, Ali, right where Khartoum is? In Khartoum is where two bodies of water called tributaries, there's a smaller bodies of water. The one is called the Blue Nile and one is called the White Nile. And they meet in Khartoum to form the Big Nile, that Nile River that runs all the way from Egypt through to Ethiopia. And that river is very important for all the people of all those countries. It is a source of agriculture. It's used for farming. It's used for grazing cattle. Cities are all built up along the Nile River. So the Nile is a very important river. And it's been a source of conflict as well as support for all of the people. Right now, Sudan and Egypt and Ethiopia are having lots of discussions about the water on the Nile because there's a concern that everyone is not getting their fair share. Ethiopia is building a dam, and the people in Khartoum and in Egypt are concerned about whether the Nile River flow is going to be disrupted by their dam. So that's an interesting topic. If you're interested in topography and rivers, you might want to do a little research on the River Nile because it is truly the most important water source in this area. The other thing that you see in Sudan is plains and mountains. The northern area of Sudan has lots of wide open land, and those are desert areas and plains. Now, I know that Montana has a lot of plains as well, and Montana also has rocky mountains. Sudan has a mountain formation as well. So I think the landscape of Montana is probably similar to parts of northern Sudan. So if you're interested in geography, I think you might want to do a comparison by looking at the mountains of Sudan and the mountains of Montana and the plains and the open area of Montana and the open areas of Sudan. You're going to find a lot of similarities. Whereas people used to graze bison in Montana and maybe cattle now, they still graze a lot of cattle in northern Sudan. So that's the geography. Thank you for the map. Ali, you can take the map away. Let me come back to the question I raised earlier about religion. I started talking about religion because religion is a very important question in Sudan because it has two strong dominant religions, Islam and Christianity. And Islam and Christianity have coexisted for many, many, many centuries. And that's the case in a lot of parts of Africa. But at a certain point in time, one of the governments that came into power in Khartoum decided that they wanted to interpret Islam in a way that was very strict. They decided that people couldn't consume any alcohol, certain foods were restricted, and women were required to dress a certain way. They had to wear head coverings and they could not wear pants. And those restrictions came out of a very strict interpretation of what they called Sharia law in Islam. And that became a source of tension for many of the ethnic groups that had their own religious views. And so even to today, you will still find a lot of conflict around what parts of Islam people are required to adhere to. But these laws are changing because in the last couple of years, Sudan has gotten a new government, and I'm coming to that, and this new government is lifting some of those restrictions that were a part of Islamic law, and people are having a lot more freedom to express their religion. Now, Islam, just like Christianity, are both religions of peace. And it's important to keep that in mind because when people are having conflict around religion, it doesn't mean that religion is the source of the conflict, but sometimes people have interpreted religions in a way that restrict the rights of other people. But I want you to know that today the situation is changing. So let's talk about modern Sudan. After decades of war, I told you that the southern part of the country separated, and so South Sudan is now a separate country. So already Sudan has been affected by the fact that it's not as large as it used to be, and there are two distinct groups of people that practice religion differently. And now that has kind of been the concept that is growing in Sudan proper, where more people are wanting to have freedom of expression, freedom of religion. And so in the last couple of years, people started protesting the religious restrictions, and they started protesting about the high cost of food. Food was going up. It was very expensive to feed your families. And there was more and more corruption in the government. And because of that, young people started joining together along with lots of women's groups, and they started protesting in the street. I'd say this goes back to the year 2019, and those protests started happening all across Sudan. And because of these protests, the government of the day was finally removed. The government at that time was led by a military leader whose name was Omar al-Bashir. People said, we don't want military government. We don't want a government that imposes religious views on us. And so people protested, and the government of Bashir was finally removed. And now you have a new government coming into place in Sudan. And eventually the people are going to vote on what kind of government they want in the future. But this change has been really, really important and profound in Sudan, because it meant that after many years of military leadership, people now are saying they want not military government, but they want to elect their own leaders. They want to pick their leaders. And so that's been one of the most positive and important changes that's happened in Sudan in the last few years. And as I said, the people who take credit for that are young people, people your age and older, and many women. They were the ones to go out and protest in the streets. Well, how does something like that happen? One of the most important ways it happened is through something that you're all familiar with, social media. If you don't know how important social media is in Africa, Sudan is a good example of how important social media is. Because it was on the internet that people started sending messages and communicating and expressing their concerns and talking about the things that they wanted to change. So social media was really very important in bringing about the big change in Sudan, which was nothing short of a revolution, a peaceful people's revolution. So in 2019, the Sudanese had a peaceful people's revolution. They got a new government. And now the good news story coming out of Sudan is that it's a country that is trying to give more people freedom of expression, a chance to have a voice, a chance to be heard, a chance to decide what kind of government they want, what kind of religion they want to practice, and how they want to express themselves culturally. One of the most important things that has happened with this new government that's come in since the 2019 revolution is that there's no longer a strict enforcement of Islamic law. Women can now wear what they want to wear. They don't have to wear head coverings, or they can wear head coverings. It's your choice. Women don't have to wear dresses. They can wear pants or anything they want to wear. And for women, that was a very important thing, because in the old days, a woman could be beat on the street by the police for not wearing what they called Islamic dress. So it was really a really important bit of progress for women that under the new government, they no longer have those restrictions on what they can wear and how they can express themselves. The other thing that's really important and good news coming out of Sudan is that the Sudanese revolution is inspiring people all across Africa and across the world. Many countries in Africa look to Sudan now and say, the people there peacefully decided to change their government. We can do that too. And so there's been a lot of inspiration from the Sudanese revolution to get other people to think about how to peacefully call for change in their country. And people are using the internet, and young people are organizing, and women's groups are organizing. And so you see more of this push for change, for positive, peaceful change. And a lot of it was inspired by the Sudanese. The other thing that's really important, I think, that's coming out of Sudan is the power of young people. Sudan has a very young population. So does most of Africa. Sudan's population is about 60% young people. That means that 60% of the population is under 30. That's a lot of young people. In Africa, across the board, about 40% of the population is between 15 and 24. So what does it mean to have so many young people? Well, the good news is that young people, and you all know this, young people have different and new ways of seeing the world. They bring ideas and new skills and new visions that make for dynamic countries, dynamic societies. So because Sudan's population is so young, we are expecting to see many young people who join the workforce bringing new ideas and new energies and new ways of doing things. The very fact that people are using the internet and social media all across the country, talking to people in their country, in Africa, in the United States, in Europe, means that young people are bringing new ideas about how to govern the country, how to do business, how to do so many things. And so this young population has really been very important for a country like Sudan. The other thing, of course, is the internet. The internet has been growing and growing and growing. And that means more ideas are coming into the country. So people who live in faraway places, like in remote areas of Montana, if they have access to the internet, you really have access to the world. You can study languages and geography and history and politics from anywhere. And Sudanese people are doing that more and more because the internet is expanding. But let me talk about one final topic that I think you'll be interested in before we open it up for questions. I'm sure a lot of you all are thinking, well, when young people aren't changing the world, what else are they doing? Well, they're making music, just like you guys make music and the way you guys enjoy music. And what do you think is the most popular music in Sudan among young people? It's the same as it is in the United States. It's rap music. If you Google rap music in Sudan, you will get so many rap artists. And these rap artists are really growing in popularity because they are speaking about all the things that young people care about. They are talking about the dreams of young people. They're talking about the kind of government that they want. They're talking about the kind of country that they want. They're talking about their lives. And so rap music has become a way for young people to express themselves. They also take inspiration from American artists like Public Enemy and Jay-Z and Kanye West and Eminem. These are all popular rap artists in Sudan, believe it or not. And they rap in English and in Arabic. So if you don't know how to speak Arabic yet, check out some Arabic rap. It might be a good way to get an introduction to learning Arabic. So I would say rap music is something that young people have in common everywhere. It's very popular in Africa and very popular in Sudan. So maybe after this call, you'll get up and you'll do a little Googling. Check out some Sudanese rap. You'll be very interested to hear how much it sounds like American rap. Okay, the very last thing I'm going to say, and this is not such good news, but it's something that everybody is focused on and working on. It's the issue of COVID. COVID-19 is an issue in Sudan, just as it is in the United States. But fortunately, the numbers aren't nearly as high as they've been in the United States. And the people in Sudan are eager to get vaccinated and are trying to understand how to protect themselves from COVID. The infection rate right now is about 1.5%. So it's still very small. And the government is struggling very hard to keep it small. The numbers of people vaccinated is also very small. It's about 1.5% of the population. So they've got a long way to go. But one of the things the US government is doing to help the people of Sudan and to help Sudan as a country is donating vaccines. So that's something that the US government does because we think it's important that we protect ourselves as well as the people in other countries, and Sudan is one of those countries. With that, I'm going to stop because I hope we've got a lot of great questions. There's nothing you can't ask. I'll give it my best shot. So with that, I'm going to throw it open to Mrs. Oberweiser's class or any of the other classes who are on screen. Anxious to hear your questions, and I'll do my very best to give you a good answer.
I think we lost, the other class was having some internet issues, and I think we lost them for at least a little bit. So let's just have this discussion with Ms. Oberweiser's class and go there.
I'm going to invite Boston up with a question. You don't have a thought in your head? Come up here and think of something that you would like to, that you might.
Hey, Ms. Oberweiser, while we're waiting for one of the students to come up, can you tell us what grade these kids are in?
These are 7th and 8th graders.
Nice.
And our community has about 300 people, mostly ranching. And kids come from as far away as Clinton on one side of Drummond and Albert or Helmville. So they're
Great.
on the bus for a little ways to get here. But
Great.
Boston lives pretty close. And I think Dawson also had some questions. You had some thoughts that you were writing down. So they were writing down not just things that they were learning, but also things they might wonder about.
Absolutely. Okay, glad to hear it. That's a great question. And I'm going to be very honest to say I don't know the exact number, but that's a good question to Google. But what I will tell you is that the pyramids are located in the northeastern part of the country. And there's a city called Merowe, M-E-R-O-W. It's an old Sudanese city. That's where some of the biggest pyramids were found. But I would probably say that there are hundreds of them. They may not be as big as the pyramids in Egypt. The pyramids in Egypt, the big ones are Giza, and I think that's one of the biggest pyramids in Egypt. They may not be that big, but Sudan has many, many, many more. So give it a good Google, but I'd say it's probably safe to guess there are hundreds of them.
And Miss Oberweiser, when you, after the students ask the question, if you could mute your microphone again, because we're getting some feedback. I can hear myself talking. And while we're waiting for another student, I might just follow up with, it's one of the questions I wrote down, Ambassador, too, is I find it interesting as a former social studies teacher, to wonder why we didn't learn, like these 7th and 8th grade kids here in their social studies class, they're going to learn about the pyramids of Egypt. Well, I'm wondering, I want to look into it more myself and wonder, why aren't we learning about the pyramids that are in Sudan?
Well, Greg, that's an excellent question. And it's one of the biggest untold stories of Sudan. I'd say part of the reason is that Egypt, because the pyramids are so central to their history and their culture and their religion, we've always been taught about the Pyramid of Giza and the great pharaohs and the kings and the queens of Egypt. We've always known about them. But Sudan, because the pyramids weren't maintained by the government and because there was so much war and people didn't travel to Sudan because of the war, the pyramids are just not well known. One of the important things to know is that if your country is at war, your country becomes rather insular. People don't get to visit. People don't get to exchange ideas. And Sudan has been at war for many years, at least in the most recent history. So people didn't travel as much. But now, because the country is peaceful and is inviting tourism, more people are going. And I think the government's going to be investing money to maintain their pyramids and to maintain that area. The Egyptians have done that for many decades. They have made tourism around their pyramids. The Sudanese just didn't do that because of the many conflicts they were having. But I think that's something that we're going to see more of. And I hope that it will encourage more people to study about the pyramids, because the history of Sudan and Egypt is very much linked. At one point, the people of Sudan actually ruled Egypt. Not many people know that. That's something you never hear about because that period wasn't well recorded, but it's there for those scholars who really want to do some digging. And because of the time that the Sudanese ruled Egypt, there was more of this intermingling of the religion and the language and the culture. And so today you still see a lot of Egyptian influences in Sudanese culture. And if you go to Egypt, you'll see a lot of Sudanese people. So they really are a mixed culture because of the religion, the pyramids, the trade routes. So you'll see the history there. But I don't have a short answer for you. It's a long, complicated answer. But I say start the digging now. You may give me the best answer next year. Mrs. Oberweiser, any more questions from your class? I think somebody else had a question.
Yes. Can you say your name?
Dawson.
Hi, Dawson.
What kind of animals are in Sudan?
Excellent question. And I was glad to hear Mrs. Oberweiser say that you all come from cattle ranching, cattle farming communities, because the people in Sudan raise a lot of cattle too. Cattle is a very important animal, and not only do they raise cattle for food, but from their long history, cattle is also a source of wealth. People use cattle like money. Over the decades, when somebody was getting married in a family, the way you would bind the two families, the groom and the bride's family, is they would exchange cattle. The bride's family would say, our daughter is very valuable. If you want to marry our daughter, you have to give us cattle. And so families grow cattle and raise cattle because they use it to trade, to give to other families when they're getting married. They use it to sell when they need to get cash to buy some other things, if they want to travel or if they need to buy materials to build their house. So cattle is not just raised for eating and for food, but it's also a source of currency. And the third thing I would say about cattle is that cattle it shows your wealth. So it's your prestige. It's like having a lot of gold, fancy gold, or having a lot of money in the bank. If you've got 1,000 head of cattle, you're considered a really important, influential person in Sudan. And that's because cattle have all of these important meanings: money and status and marriage bonds. So cattle is very important. The other animals you might find, they have goats. Goats are also very popular, not nearly as in large numbers as cattle, but people also raise goats and they graze goats. And so goats roam free in a lot of places. Even in the city, like in Khartoum, you can see people raising goats even in the city. If you go down to southern Sudan, which is now, as I said, a separate country, cattle are even more important. I lived in southern Sudan, and you could be driving your car down the street and suddenly you had to stop because somebody was walking across the street with their 50 cattle in the middle of the capital city. Can you imagine in the middle of Helena, somebody walking through the city with all their cattle just crossing the street? Well, in Sudan, that's not so uncommon. And the cattle have really big horns. One of the important things about the cattle in Sudan and South Sudan is they groom the cattle and they try to shape the horns. So from a very young age, the little boys who really are the ones who tend to the cattle will be out in the cattle patch really trying to shape the horns. The horns can be huge and they can be curved, and it's a really a source of pride to have cattle with beautiful big horns. So cattle and goats are probably the biggest animals you'll see there. People, of course, eat chickens and other small animals, but if you think of Sudan, I'd say think cattle and then think goats. Thanks for the question.
Trent has one more question.
Sure.
Is there a lot of mountains? Or
Yes, there are a lot of mountains. I never got to visit the area where the mountains are, but if you go to the northern part of the country, they have an area called the Blue Mountains, and those mountains are very important for the people who live there. Mountain areas like mountain areas in Montana, it's probably a little bit cooler in those areas than it is in the open desert plain areas. So yes, there are mountain cultures and people do live on the mountains there. So do a little Googling about the mountains there, but I think you're going to find out that the mountains there look very similar to mountains in Montana. So yeah, if you're a mountain guy, you're going to like Sudan. Beautiful. Oh, thanks a lot. And you know what they call the mountains in Sudan? They call them jebels. Jebel. And I see this map says Jebel Mara, and these are some of the mountains in Sudan. So when people talk about the Jebels, that's the traditional word for mountains. Thank you for that picture. It's a great one.
So, Ambassador, I'm not sure how much longer Ms. Oberweiser's class is going to last, but maybe just take a couple minutes and talk about foreign service, and maybe
Sure.
let these 7th, 8th graders understand what that kind of means, and what are some things that could be involved in that.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, you all are at the right age to be learning about Sudan and the world. When I was in the 7th and the 8th grade, I went to school in New York City, and I didn't travel very much. As I said, I never went to Montana, and I had never left the country. But it's really important to know how big and diverse the world is, because there are so many fantastic places to visit. The first thing I would tell you to think about doing is, if you don't already have a passport, try to get a passport. When you have a passport, the world becomes wide open to you, and you can visit so many places. When I went to college, I decided I wanted to start traveling and learning more about the world. And so I started thinking about what kind of career would I want. And when I got out of college, I first went to work as a lawyer. And I was a lawyer for about 5 years, but I wasn't really enjoying it so much. I kept having this desire to see the world. And so I learned about something called the Foreign Service. The Foreign Service is the part of the United States government that works in foreign countries. And so we call it the Diplomatic Corps. The Diplomatic Corps are the diplomats, the people who are assigned to work in foreign countries to represent the United States. And so I decided I wanted to become a diplomat and represent my country in another country. And so the way you join the Foreign Service is you take an exam. And you can take the exam even if you don't go to college. You don't have to have a college degree to become a Foreign Service officer. But to be honest, most people do go to college, because the more you know, the easier it is to pass the test. So anybody who's thinking about traveling and wants to learn about other countries, I would recommend that you do go to college, if you can go to college, and then after you go to college, take the Foreign Service test. And the test will ask you things about geography and religion and history and all the things we've been talking about today. But if you pass the Foreign Service exam, then you will be invited to join the U.S. Diplomatic Service. And that means you will work for the Department of State in Washington. The Department of State is the part of the U.S. government that takes care of our diplomats and our relationships with foreign countries. So if you're a diplomat, you're going to join the State Department, and they are going to send you to work in different countries. The first country I got to work and live in was Jamaica. That was fabulous. People think of Jamaica as a vacation place. I think of Jamaica as a country, because when I lived there, I got to see it not just as a tourist destination, but as a country that has all the issues of any other country, issues of employment and housing and schooling for its people. So I got to start off in Jamaica. The next country I got to work in was Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a fascinating country in the southern part of Africa. I also then got to work in South Sudan. The city is called Juba. I got to work there. And then I got to work in another country in Africa called Eswatini, also in Southern Africa. So I've had the chance to move around. And if you're in the Foreign Service, what generally happens is you move to a country and you maybe live there for 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then you may get a new assignment and you move to another country. So it's a great career for people who like to explore, to learn new languages, to meet new people, to learn about new foods and new music. I have enjoyed every country I've been in. And you can be assigned anywhere. You can be assigned to live in Paris. I'm so sorry, excuse me, everyone. When you join the Foreign Service, you can be assigned any place in the world. I wanted to work in Africa, so I was assigned to Africa. But some people choose to work in Europe or in Asia or in the Caribbean. And so there's so many countries you can choose to work in, and the US government will move you there. Not only will they move you there, but they'll move your entire family and all of your belongings. So if you happen to have a spouse if you have children, or if you have a pet. The State Department will move you and your pets and your family to whatever country you're going to live in. And that's really important because these days, a lot of people say, well, I'd like to live in Peru, but not if I can't take my dog with me. State Department says, no problem. They'll take you and they'll take your dog, and you can all move to Peru and learn Spanish and work and represent your country. And it's the greatest experience of my life because people want to know about the United States. And I can tell you that honestly, everywhere I've ever lived, people have been interested in the United States. They love our culture. They want to know more about our music. They want to know more about our television and our movies. And they want to know more about American people. So if you're interested in seeing the world, the Foreign Service might just be the career for you. So think about that. Again, if you Google Foreign Service, everything is now online. You can learn about the exam and how one does it. But first you got to finish high school. And after high school, then the Foreign Service could wait for you, could be there for you.
Awesome.
Other questions?
Thanks, Ambassador. Chris, you have any closing words for us?
I do. I just want to say to Ambassador James, thank you so much for lending us your expertise, your experience, your energy, your knowledge, and really helping us understand a little bit better about Sudan, its people, its culture, and what happens there. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Mrs. Oberweiser's class. And then also, as you know, many classrooms will be watching this recorded piece and be getting the same kind of information. So thanks to Mrs. Oberweiser and your students and the other students who are also going to be watching this. Special thanks to our friends at Inspired Classroom to help us here, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and of course, our sponsors for the program, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Qatar Foundation International, Allegiance, BNSF Railway Foundation, First Security Bank, and Trail West Bank. And there you go, another amazing GeoQuest episode. Special thanks again to Ambassador James. Ambassador, any last words imparting to our students here in Montana?
You guys were, I loved your questions. I loved your interest. Keep opening your mind to the world and see you in either Montana or in Sudan. Have a great day.
Thank you.